This will be my third video going over the Unit 7 review on polynomials and factoring. There should be 4 videos in total here. So this one we're going to go from 14 to 23, and then there'll be another video going after that. So I'm going to get started here. It says, I can factor trinomials using a greatest common factor. Remember the greatest common factor function we have in the Chromebook is a GCF on Desmos. Some of you are using a TI-84. Use the GCD function on the TI-84. So on this particular problem, I'm going to skip B for now. I was going to do B, but I'm going to do A and C. We'll do a problem like B further down here, if you will. So it says, for each expression, identify the greatest common factor if one exists. So if I look here, we have 15c squared minus 65c. I'm going to type in both 15 and 65 here and see if we have a greatest common factor, and that is 5. So we can pull out a 5 on both of these, and notice we can also pull out a variable because we have c squared, which is c times c, and then negative 65c here. So we can pull out one of those c's there, and so your answer should be 5c on A. I'll do B as well, might as well. So if I'm gonna type in 16, negative 64, and 11, and when you do the greatest common factor function, you can do all 3 of these. So the GCF, I've got 16, comma, negative 64, comma, 11, and it says there's no greatest common factor here. So on that particular side, because 1 doesn't count, because when I factor out a 1, the 16, negative 64, and plus 11 don't change. They stay the same. And if we look here, we've got 2x's for the 16x squared. We've got 1x on the negative 64x, and then there's no x here. So since all of them don't have an x, I can't factor out any variable here either. And so there's just no greatest common factor, which is why I did this one, because you can't factor anything on that one. And so you would have to go from here using the methods we're going to use down here on the bottom on 19 through 23 to factor any further on this. Now C here, this is a trinomial. We haven't done many of these, greatest common factor on these, so that's why I want to do this one. Type in an A, comma, 14, comma, negative 4, and it says here I can factor out a 2, which is kind of nice. Now, if you're using the TI-84 on this one, you can't plug in 3 of them. You have to do 2 at a time. And so if you're doing 2 of them at a time, 8 and 14 is a greatest factor of 2. And then you can just do like 8 and negative 4. And you'll see that has the same, oops, that one says 4. So, and so you want to try out all of them, right? So we try 14 and 4 as well. And we get a greatest common factor of 2. So that's the only one that we can pull out of all of them as a 2. Because 14 isn't divisible by 4 to get a whole number. So that one, C is 2, if you're using a TI-84. Now I'm going to look at 15. It says, use the graphic organizer to factor, is it T? To factor the polynomial. So we have 18, negative 27, and negative 36 on this one. So I'm going to type in 18, comma, negative 27, comma, negative 36, and we get a greatest common factor of 9 that I can pull out. I'm going to put that down here because I think we're going to factor it completely. We're not going to just use greatest common factor. So I can pull out a 9 here, and then we have an r times r, and we have an r, and we have no r. So I can't actually factor out any variables here. So I can only factor out a 9. So when I factor out a 9, it's like dividing these coefficients by a 9. And that constant by 9. And so what's 18 divided by 9? That's 2. So we would have a 2 here. Negative 27 divided by 9 would be like a negative 3. And then negative 36 divided by 9 is a 4. And I'm kind of jumping ahead here. When I do this, I should be putting the 18r squared here, negative 27r, and minus 36. And then our greatest common factor always goes on this side. So this is from lesson 7.4, I believe. So if you have any questions, I think we did this in lesson 7.4. So I should have immediately, and I apologize, I should have put these 3 in here first. And then when I pull out the greatest common factor, it goes here. And then I need to figure out what these values are. And so I kind of did this out of order. So when I divide these by 9, The 18 divided by 9 gives me a 2 above the 18r squared. The negative 27 divided by 9 gives me a negative 3. And then the negative 36 divided by 9 gets me a 4. And so now I just need to look at the r values. So when I factored out the greatest common factor, I didn't factor out any r's. So the r's should match what's in the box here for the factors on the top. So because 9 times 2 is 18, but there's no r's with a 9, and so the 18r squared needs to have r squared on the top. Again, 9 times negative 3 is a negative 27. There's no r with a 9, so we need to have a negative 3r on the top. And then 9 times 4, that should actually be a negative 4. That's why we check our answers. And that will multiply it to a negative 36. So when we factor out 18r squared minus 27r minus 36, we factored out the greatest common factor 9. And then into the parentheses, we should have 2r squared minus 3r minus 4. So sorry I kind of did this out of order, but this would be your answer on this problem. Looking at number 16, it says factor each polynomial. I'm not going to do A, but I am going to do B here. B is the harder of the two. And so we always want to look for factoring out the greatest common factor first. I'm going to hit the GCF function again, and I'm going to type in 54, negative 12, and 24. And a big clue that we can factor something here is that we all have even numbers here. So at least I can pull a 2 out of all these, which would make this problem a little bit easier to factor if I wanted to. So I'm going to do 54, comma, negative 12, comma, 24 in my greatest common factor function. And it looks like we can pull out a 6. So we can factor out a 6 here. I'll do that here. And so when I factor out a 6, let's kind of do it this way. Let's do this. Now, I'm not going to factor it per se like less than 7/6, like on 19. I'm just going to pull out the greatest common factor here, and I'm going to solve it kind of like what I did for number 15. So I'm not going to go completely factor it out because we don't have the space for that. I don't think that's what they're asking for here. And so can I factor out, can I factor out any variables here? We have an x squared, an x, and no x here. So I can't factor out any variables here. So my greatest common factor here would be 6. I'm going to write down this 54x squared here. I'm going to write down the negative 12x here and the plus 24 here. And when I solve these, when I factor out a 6, it's like I'm dividing all of these by a 6. And I'm running out of space here very quickly. Kind of needed a lot more space here. So what's 54 divided by 6? That gets me a 9. So we would have a 9x squared here because there's no x with the 6. What's negative 12 divided by 6? Well, that's negative 2. And we're going to have an x here because 6 times negative 12 has a negative 12, but we need one x between these two. So that goes with this one. And then what's 24 divided by 6? That's a positive 4. And so if we're going to just factor out the greatest common factor here, we would be left with 6 times 9x squared minus minus 2x. Sorry, there's too much going on here. Minus 2x and then plus 4. So, yeah, so we'd have 6 times 9x squared minus 2x plus 4. What I have here in red should go here. And so it's a little hard to see. I'm sorry. There's just not a lot of space here. And I kind of made a little mistake. So that would be your answer on this problem here. So typically we could go beyond this, right? Typically we would multiply our 8 times c, and then we'd write down our b value, and we do all that kind of stuff like we're going to see on number 19, but we're not going to do that here. Number 18 says write an expression. Let me get this right. So write an expression. I'm going to get Desmos out of here. Write an expression to represent the perimeter of the square, then factor the polynomial. So we have a square, right? We know all these sides are congruent. So we know this is 8x plus 16. This side is 8x plus 16. This side is 8x plus 16. We can add up all these if we wanted to and do an 8x plus 16 plus 8x plus 16 plus 8x plus 16 plus 8x plus 16. That's a little silly for a square. I could just multiply each side. We have 4 sides by 8x plus 16, since we know all the sides are equal to each other. And so I'm going to just take, to find the perimeter here, my perimeter, instead of adding this up 4 times, I'm just going to multiply it by 4. And if you don't like that, you can do 8x plus 16, 8x plus 16, plus 8x plus 16, plus 8x plus 16. But that's a lot of work and it takes up a lot of space. So I'm just going to multiply the number of sides here by 8x plus 16, and that should give me the perimeter of all 4 of these. So what's 4 times 8x? That's 32x. And 4 times 16 is 8 plus 64. And so that would be the perimeter. The perimeter is going to be 32x plus 64. Now it wants us to factor this. So when I factor this, I have my 32x plus 64. I'm just going to use the GCF function here, and I'm going to pull out the greatest common factor. So we will go with a 32, comma 16, or 64 that is. And it looks like the greatest common factor of 32 and 64 is a 32. So I can literally pull out a 32x here. And so we'll do this down here. I need more space. So we'll put the 32x here, and the 64 here. We'll do the 32 here. And so I can't factor out an x from both of these. So the greatest common factor is just 32. So what times 32 gets me 32x? Well, that would just be like an x, a single x here, right? I meant to do that in blue. Or you could just divide this by 32, and you'd find out you get a 1 here. And then we need an x, and so we get an x. And then what times 32 gets me 64? Well, that's 2. Or you could have just done 64 divided by 32, and you'll get a plus 2. And so the factors for 32x plus 64 are just 32 times x plus 2. And that would be you factoring, problem number 18. So there we go. So I'm going to keep going here. And I'm going to stop here. I think this video's gotten long enough. I'll do another video to do 19, 21, and 23. I think this video's gotten